Hey guys, tonight we're tucking ourselves into a wonderfully specific, surprisingly intimate, and utterly essential corner of history. Forget the grand narratives of empires rising and falling, the clashing of swords, or the intricate dance of courtly intrigue that usually gets all the attention. No, tonight we're focusing on something far more fundamental. Something every single one of us does, every single day, for roughly a third of our lives: sleep. More specifically, we're diving into the truly unexpected lives of historical bedmakers. From the humble pile of straw on a dirt floor to the gilded, heavily guarded canopy bed of a king, these unsung heroes. And sometimes, the very curious villains of slumber played a crucial, often unacknowledged role in medieval society, quietly shaping the most private, vulnerable moments of kings and commoners alike. Their stories, often lost to the footnotes of history, are surprisingly rich, revealing profound truths about comfort, status, hygiene, and the very structure of human existence in a world so different from our own. So, before you sprawl out on your perfectly sprung memory foam paradise tonight, perhaps hit that like button and subscribe. Only, of course, if you're truly ready to uncover the surprisingly complex, often unglamorous, and sometimes shockingly dangerous world of historical bedmakers. Because trust me, there's more to it than just a neatly made duvet. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there, across the world, preparing for their own night's rest. Now, dim the lights, maybe fluff your favourite pillow for that soft background hum, the modern equivalent of your medieval straw mattress rustling with fleas, and let's ease into tonight's truly unexpected journey together. Prepare for some rather gritty details. This isn't a bedtime story for the faint of heart. Imagine for a moment leaving your perfectly sprung, climate-controlled memory foam paradise. No, seriously, imagine it's gone. You're back, right alongside our medieval peasant, in that cramped, smoky, perpetually mud-scented hut we've discussed. This is a place where every aspect of life, from eating to working, was a constant negotiation with discomfort and scarcity. And guess what? Your bed, that supposed sanctuary of rest and solace, was often no different. For the vast, anonymous majority of people in the Middle Ages, the common peasant, the humble serf, the concept of a bedmaker, as a specialised, recognised profession, simply didn't exist. Instead, making the bed was a daily, often unglamorous, and utterly vital chore of survival, performed by whoever had the strength, the time, and the grim determination to tackle it. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about the brutal, non-negotiable necessity of getting your body off the cold, damp earth and finding a modicum of warmth and insulation, however fleeting. Your typical medieval peasant bed was, for want of a better, more comfortable word, a pile. Specifically, a large, often uneven, pile of straw, dry leaves, or rushes gathered directly from the fields or local forests. This material was usually laid directly on the dirt floor of that smoky single-room hut, offering the most basic form of bedding imaginable. This wasn't a quaint, rustic, eco-friendly choice. It was pure, unadulterated necessity, driven by the utter lack of alternatives. Straw, being abundant and cheap, free if you gathered it yourself, offered some meagre insulation from the perpetually cold, damp earth that would otherwise leach warmth from your body, and a faint, fleeting illusion of softness. It was better than nothing, which, for many, was the alternative. But this mattress came with its own distinct, rather charming set of drawbacks. Chief among these was the fact that it very quickly became a living, thriving, multi-generational ecosystem of fleas, lice, bedbugs, and whatever other tiny, itchy, scuttling creatures decided that your body heat and the detritus of human existence made for a rather appealing, rent-free home. It was a vital, and frequently disgusting task, usually undertaken every few weeks or months, or when the stench became utterly unbearable, to get rid of the compacted filth, the accumulated vermin, the dampness, and the pervasive cloying smell of, well, everything that had settled into the straw. Sweat, animal droppings, spilled food, and the general grime of a life lived outdoors. Imagine the physical labour involved, dragging out armfuls of stale, insect-ridden, often mouldering straw, perhaps still warm and slightly rank from the body heat of multiple sleepers, and a stray chicken or piglet that had snuggled in for the night. This old material would then be unceremoniously dumped outside, or perhaps used as a meagre, last-resort fertilizer, making way for a fresh, albeit equally scratchy and potentially bug-laden, pile of newly gathered straw. This, my friends, was the bed-making of the common folk. A never-ending, utterly exhausting battle against dirt, disease, and the relentless, insidious creep of creepy crawlies. It was a fight you were constantly losing, but one you had to keep waging simply to exist. For the slightly less destitute, perhaps a wealthier peasant who owned a bit more land, or a village craftsman with a steady trade, the bed might be a simple wooden frame. This was a significant step up, a truly luxurious upgrade, because it got you off the damp, often infested dirt floor. It offered a crucial barrier against some of the ground-level chill and creeping things, a small victory in the ongoing war against discomfort. The frame would then be filled with a mattress, which was essentially a large sack, crudely stitched from coarse linen or wool, stuffed with more straw, dried bracken, or perhaps even coarse wool if you had sheep and could spare the material. Feathers, true feathers, from geese or ducks, were an extreme luxury, a mark of genuine prosperity, offering significantly less itching, more warmth, and a level of softness that would have been akin to floating on a cloud compared to straw. To sleep on feathers was not just comfort, it was a potent, undeniable symbol of significantly higher social status, separating you from the masses. But even with a frame and a stuffed mattress, privacy, as we've repeatedly noted, was a foreign concept, utterly non-existent. Multiple family members, often parents, children, and sometimes elderly relatives, would pile onto one large bed, spooning together to share precious body heat in the unheated, drafty rooms of the hut. This wasn't just practical for warmth during the bone-chilling medieval winters. It was a way to conserve precious resources and space in an already cramped home. The bed, then, wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a communal hub of warmth, a shared space where the line between humans and sometimes animals who snuck in was wonderfully, uncomfortably blurred. Newborns would be nestled close to their mothers for warmth and ease of feeding. Older children would huddle at the feet, all tangled together in a desperate attempt to fend off the cold. The bedmaker, in this context, was still primarily the family itself, a collective effort driven by an unspoken understanding of mutual dependence and a grim determination to keep the primary source of warmth and rest as clean, or rather, as unfilthy as humanly possible, given the circumstances. This stark reality of peasant beds stands in brutal, almost shocking contrast to our modern notions of personal space, individual comfort, and basic hygiene. There was no delicate turning down of crisp sheets, no fluffy, perfectly plump pillowcases, no evening routine of scented candles and tranquilizers. Your blanket might be a coarse wool cloak, worn during the day as your primary outer garment, pulled over you at night, carrying with it the smells of the field, the stable, and the accumulated grime of your day's labour. The act of making the bed was less about decorative arrangement and more about functional upkeep. A constant gritty battle against the elements, the dirt, and the teeming inhabitants of your straw. It was an essential daily or weekly monthly ritual, but one steeped in the harsh realities of survival, utterly removed from any sense of comfort, luxury, or even personal peace. So, the humble beginnings of the bedmaker were rooted not in service to a privileged few, but in the sheer, undeniable, and often disgusting necessity of keeping oneself and one's family from freezing to death, suffocating in smoke, or simply itching into madness. This, my friends, is just the very beginning of how the lives of these seemingly simple individuals became so surprisingly complex and incredibly central to the very act of existing in the medieval world. And we haven't even gotten to the nobles yet. Right then, we've covered the ground, or rather the straw, of the medieval peasant sleeping arrangements, a constant itchy battle for basic warmth and survival. We've established that for them, bedmaker wasn't a job title, it was just a part of the endless, weary grind. But as we move up the rigid, mud-splattered ladder of medieval society, things start to get, well, slightly less grim. Not comfortable, mind you, not by our standards, but the very concept of a bed, and the people who tended it, begins its slow, fascinating evolution into a symbol of wealth, status, and even power. Tonight we're climbing a rung or two, out of the peasant's hut and into the more substantial, though still draughty, homes of the burgeoning merchant class and the lower gentry. Here, the bedmaker starts to emerge as a more defined role, and the bed itself becomes a canvas for displaying newfound prosperity. So, before you judge their slightly cleaner sheets, consider giving a like and subscribing. Only, of course, if you're ready to see how a little coin could change your nightly routine, and how even a modest feather could signal a world of difference. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps imagine the faint scent of beeswax, a sign of minor luxury. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, where the beds get better, but the job of making them gets more complicated. Imagine for a moment you're no longer sleeping on a pile of straw on a dirt floor, but you're still miles from a modern mattress store. You've got a bit of coin, perhaps from successful trade or a modest inheritance. This slight bump in fortune brings with it a significant upgrade in your sleeping arrangements, the rise of the bed frame. This wasn't just a simple piece of carpentry, it was a profound leap in medieval comfort and hygiene. Getting your bed off the floor, even by a foot or two, meant a world of difference. It offered improved insulation from the cold, damp stone or earth floors, significantly reduced the ingress of crawling pests, though by no means eliminated them, and elevated the sleeper, both literally and symbolically, above the common muck. These early bed frames were typically sturdy wooden structures, often crafted by local carpenters. They weren't carved masterpieces, but functional, robust pieces of furniture designed to last. And how did these frames support you? Instead, they relied on a system of ropes or leather straps, tightly laced across the frame to create a kind of rudimentary suspension. Imagine the creaking and groaning as you lay down, the constant tension needing to be adjusted. The phrase, "sleep tight," actually has its roots here, referring to the need to pull those ropes taut each night to prevent the mattress from sagging into a hammock-like abyss. Your personal bedmaker, now perhaps a dedicated household servant, more likely a female member of the family that, distinct from the field labour, would be responsible for this nightly ritual, tightening the ropes, ensuring a relatively firm, if still uneven, sleeping surface. This was a physical task, requiring strength and regularity, a small but essential bit of maintenance that determined the quality of your rest. Stacked upon these roped frames were mattresses of increasing quality. While straw and bracken still made an appearance, particularly as a base layer, the true mark of comfort and status for the merchant class was the advent of the featherbed. Imagine the sheer luxury. Instead of the scratchy, rustling, flea-infested straw, you now had a large sack, often made of fine linen or sturdy canvas, plumply stuffed with feathers and down, typically from geese or ducks. It was a tangible, undeniable upgrade in sensory experience, a quiet revolution in personal comfort. However, these feather beds also required significant upkeep. They needed to be regularly fluffed, aired out in the sun to dry any accumulated dampness and deter pests, and occasionally restuffed. This meant that the bed maker was no longer just laying out straw. They were managing a valuable asset, ensuring its longevity and its continued comfort. The quality of your feather bed could instantly signal your prosperity to any guest who ventured into your chamber. Along with better mattresses came the burgeoning concept of bedding and linens. For the first time, some households could afford actual sheets, separate pieces of fine linen or sometimes coarse cotton that were laid over the mattress. These would be washed, a laborious process involving lye and strong hands, but a process nonetheless, providing a layer of cleanliness beyond what a peasant could dream of. Blankets were more substantial, often woven wool, sometimes even with a top coverlet of simple tapestry or embroidered cloth, adding a touch of colour and warmth. These items represented a significant investment and required diligent care. The bedmaker's duties now expanded to include washing, mending, and carefully arranging these layers, transforming the bed from a mere pile into a composed, if simple, structure. It was an early form of domestic presentation, a nascent step towards the elaborate rituals of bedmaking that would later define aristocratic households. The bed itself, for this class, began to solidify its role as a nascent status symbol. While still primarily functional, a well-made wooden bed frame supporting a feather mattress covered with decent blankets and, crucially, clean sheets, was a visible declaration of your rising wealth and social standing. It spoke volumes without a single word. I can afford to buy wood, hire a carpenter, keep livestock for feathers, and have someone, or time myself, to clean linens. The bed wasn't just a place to sleep, it was becoming a piece of furniture to be seen, hinting at the private wealth and domestic order of the household. Guests might be offered a place in your chamber, and a glance at your bed would quickly tell them where you stood in the grand scheme of things. This shift naturally led to the emergence of more dedicated early professional bedmakers. While still often a multifaceted role, performed by household servants, typically women, as domestic tasks fell within their purview, it was becoming more specialised. These servants were distinct from the field labourers. Their work was primarily inside the house, managing the domestic sphere. Their daily duties revolved around the bed, making sure the ropes were tight, airing the feather mattress, beating it to fluff it up, changing the hopefully clean sheets, arranging the blankets, and keeping the area around the bed as free of vermin as possible. This was a constant battle, involving shaking out blankets, sweeping the floor, and dealing with the inevitable infestations that still plagued medieval homes. They were responsible for maintaining the comfort and presentability of the bed, a reflection of the household's overall standing. Their lives were still hard, certainly, but their daily grind was focused on a different kind of labour, one that brought them into closer contact with the domestic heart of the home and the intimate spaces of the family they served. And though things were improved, the battle for hygiene and against pests was far from over. Even with frames and feather beds, medieval homes were still warm, damp, and often filled with organic material, making them ideal breeding grounds for fleas, lice, and bedbugs. The bedmaker's job was a constant vigilance, an ongoing skirmish against these tiny invaders. Regular cleaning, airing, and beating of bedding were essential, tedious tasks that were never truly completed. The fight was less desperate than for the peasant, perhaps, but it was still a daily reality, a reminder that true cleanliness as we understand it was still centuries away. The dream of a truly sterile, pest-free bed was a fantasy, but a slightly cleaner, less itchy sleep was now within reach for a fortunate few. Finally, this rising class saw the bed moving from the communal, multi-purpose peasant hut into a dedicated sleeping chamber, offering a nascent form of privacy for the first time for some. This wasn't always a private room for each individual, but perhaps a chamber shared only by the immediate family, distinct from the main hall where everyone ate and socialised. This physical separation brought with it a new appreciation for personal space and a growing desire for a more secluded, intimate night's rest. The bed, once a public hub, was slowly transitioning into a more personal domain, a harbinger of the private bedrooms that would become standard in later centuries. It was a subtle shift, but a powerful one, marking a cultural step towards individual comfort and away from the communal grind. So, for the burgeoning merchant and gentry, the bedmaker was evolving. No longer just a communal duty, it was becoming a specialised task, reflecting a growing appreciation for domestic comfort, hygiene, relative as it was, and the powerful visual language of status. Their lives, while still challenging, offered a glimpse into a world where sleep was becoming a slightly less terrifying proposition, and the bed a quiet declaration of one's place in the world. And believe me, this is just the beginning of the bed's journey to true opulence, and the bedmaker's ascent to surprising influence. Right then, we've clambered out of the scratchy straw of the peasant's hovel, and we've even spent a night or two on the slightly less itchy feather beds of the burgeoning merchant class. We've seen how the humble act of bed-making started its slow, upward climb from communal chore to a specialised task. But now, my friends, we are leaving the merely comfortable behind. We are ascending the velvet-roped, gilded stairway into the truly extravagant, politically charged, and sometimes downright dangerous world of the medieval and early modern aristocracy and, ultimately, royalty. Here, the bed isn't just a place to sleep, it's a colossal, expensive, exquisitely crafted monument to power, wealth, and status. And the people who made it, well, their lives were anything but unexpected. They were indispensable, trusted, and often caught up in the highest stakes of courtly intrigue. So, before you marvel at the sheer scale of their slumber, consider giving a like and subscribing. Only, of course, if you're prepared to witness how a simple piece of furniture could become a political battleground, and how a meticulous bedmaker could hold the keys to a kingdom. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps imagine the faint rustle of silk and the soft glow of candlelight on gold embroidery. And let's ease into tonight's truly opulent and often precarious journey together. Get ready for beds that were practically rooms unto themselves. Imagine, if you will, the private chamber of a powerful duke or even a king. You're no longer in a shared sleeping space. This is a grand room adorned with tapestries, perhaps painted walls, and a roaring fireplace. But your eyes are immediately drawn to the absolute centerpiece, the bed itself, a colossal piece of furniture, an architectural marvel carved from expensive woods like oak or walnut, often intricately gilded and adorned. This wasn't just a place to rest your head. It was a visible, undeniable declaration of immense wealth and power, a stage upon which a significant portion of a noble's life unfolded. These beds were often so large and heavy that they were built in situ, assembled in the chamber, and rarely, if ever, moved. They were not just furniture, they were immovable fixtures, symbols of permanence and status within a lineage. The very height of the bed, often requiring steps or a stool to climb into, was another subtle visual cue, elevating the sleeper, both physically and socially, above the mundane. Supporting these grand sleepers were mattresses layered with opulence. Gone are the days of simple straw. Now, we're talking multiple feather beds, each stuffed to plump perfection with the finest goose down, sometimes even scented with dried herbs or flowers. Beneath these might be a layer of wool, and then a sturdy canvas sack filled with softer straw or horsehair for foundational support. The sheer volume of feathers alone represented a staggering investment, a clear indication of a fortune. But the true display of luxury lay in the bedding and linens. We're talking not just sheets, but multiple layers of the finest, most exquisitely woven linen, often bleached to a dazzling white, smoothed and intricately folded. These sheets would be changed frequently, sometimes daily, a radical departure from peasant life, demanding constant laundering and meticulous care. Over these layers came blankets of the softest, most expensive wool, often imported, and then a dazzling array of coverlets, silks, velvets, brocades, and damasks, woven with intricate patterns, sometimes embroidered with gold and silver thread, or even studded with pearls and gemstones. Imagine a bed that literally glittered, a walking treasury in repose. These textiles were not just for warmth, they were a lavish, undeniable display of sumptuary excess, designed to impress, intimidate, and constantly remind everyone of the occupant's exalted status. And who, you might ask, was responsible for managing this monument to slumber? This is where the bedmaker truly comes into their own, evolving into highly specialized, incredibly trusted courtly positions. We're talking about roles like the groom of the chamber, or even the infamous groom of the stool. Yes, of the stool. We'll get to why that's actually a position of immense power. These were not simply domestic servants. They were often men, though women played crucial roles in the chamber. more broadly, usually of genteel birth, who served in the most intimate spaces of the monarch or powerful noble. Their job wasn't just to change sheets, it was to manage the bedchamber, a pivotal nexus of power. They were responsible for the meticulous care of the bed and its incredibly expensive trappings, ensuring cleanliness, comfort, and the security of a space where secrets were often whispered. But their duties extended far beyond mere linen folding. These bedmakers were present during the king's most vulnerable moments, when he woke, when he retired, when he was ill. They literally saw the king in his nightshirt, heard his private conversations, witnessed his moods unfiltered by courtly decorum. This proximity to power made them privy to invaluable information, gossip, and the monarch's true temperament. They became confidants, messengers, and sometimes powerful political players in their own right. The groom of the stool, for instance, had the dubious honour of assisting the monarch with his ablutions, a position that, while seemingly demeaning, granted unparalleled private access. This meant direct, unfiltered communication, bypassing all the usual court hierarchies, making them incredibly influential in advising the king, delivering messages, and even acting as gatekeepers to his attention. Imagine the sheer trust required for such a role. An incompetent or disloyal bedmaker could literally poison the king in his sleep, or simply overhear a critical state secret. Their lives, therefore, were a delicate dance of absolute loyalty, quiet observation, and careful discretion, all while meticulously ensuring the royal mattress was just right. The bed itself, for royalty and high nobility, became the stage for significant ceremonial and political acts. This was not a private space in the modern sense. It was a semi-public arena. The lever, the morning waking ceremony, and the coucher, the evening retiring ceremony, were elaborate rituals where courtiers, ambassadors, and favoured supplicants would be granted an audience with the monarch or noble in their bedchamber. Imagine a king, propped up in his magnificent bed, often wearing a nightcap, and surrounded by velvet and silk, conducting state business, receiving petitions, or granting favours, all before he even put on his breeches. The bed, therefore, was not just a place of rest, but a symbol of the body politic, a literal throne from which power was exercised. The bedmaker was central to these rituals, ensuring everything was prepared, that the right people were admitted, and that the illusion of royal majesty, even in repose, was perfectly maintained. While better than a peasant's, it was still far from our standards. The sheer volume of heavy embroidered fabrics made frequent deep cleaning nearly impossible. Instead, perfumes, incense, and herbal sachets would be liberally used to mask odours. While nobles and royals did bathe, it was still not a daily affair, often viewed as a medicinal or ritualistic activity, rather than a purely hygienic one. But the bed itself, or rather its immediate surrounds, was kept as clean as possible, with fine linens being changed. The battle against vermin, while perhaps less pervasive than in a peasant's hut, was still ongoing. The bedmaker would be responsible for regularly airing out the massive feather beds, beating them to dislodge insects and being ever vigilant against unwelcome visitors. It was a constant, if slightly more perfumed, struggle. Finally, this elevated status brought with it a terrifying flip side: security and intrigue. The royal bedchamber, for all its opulence, was a vulnerable place. A monarch, asleep, was at his most exposed. Poison, daggers, or political plots often centred on access to the bedchamber. The trust placed in the bedmakers was immense precisely because of this vulnerability. An ambitious rival, a foreign spy, or a disgruntled servant could gain unparalleled access through such a role. Histories are rife with tales of assassination attempts, clandestine meetings, and crucial political decisions made within the confines of a royal bed. The bedmaker, therefore, was not just a domestic. They were a silent guard, a trusted confidant, and a potential pawn in the deadliest games of courtly power. Their lives could be forfeit if anything went wrong, or if they were merely suspected of disloyalty. So, for the aristocracy and royalty, the bedmaker was transformed from a simple labourer into a figure of immense trust and subtle power. The bed itself evolved from a place of basic rest into a sprawling symbol of wealth, a stage for ceremony, and a dangerous nexus of political intrigue. Their lives were intimately intertwined with the most powerful figures of the age, making their unexpected lives a fascinating blend of meticulous domesticity and high-stakes courtly drama. And believe me, the beds were only going to get more ridiculously grand from here. We've journeyed from the humble, itchy straw of the peasant's floor to the respectable, if still flea-prone, feather beds of the burgeoning gentry. We've seen how the bed evolved from a basic necessity into a burgeoning symbol of status, and how its caretakers moved from weary family members to dedicated, trusted servants. But now, dear viewers, we are about to enter the true golden age of bed extravagance, a period where the bed became not just furniture, but a theatrical stage, an architectural masterpiece, and a political powerhouse in its own right. We are marching straight into the Renaissance and Baroque courts of Europe, where royalty and high nobility pushed the boundaries of ostentation, and the bedmaker ascended to a new, dizzying level of specialized craftsmanship, intimate service, and often perilous influence. So, before you consider redecorating your bedroom, perhaps hit that like button and subscribe. Only, of course, if you're ready to discover how a piece of furniture could command more attention than a diplomat, and how the art of fluffing a pillow became a matter of state. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights. Quote, dim the lights. Imagine the scent of exotic spices mingling with the faint musk of wealth, and let's ease into tonight's truly magnificent and often ridiculously over-the-top journey together. Prepare yourselves for beds that were practically rooms unto themselves, demanding an army of unseen hands. Imagine, if you will, stepping into the bedchamber of a French king like Louis XIV at Versailles, or an English monarch during the Tudor or Stuart eras. The bed itself is no longer just furniture. It is the undisputed, gargantuan centerpiece of the entire chamber, an architectural marvel carved from the most expensive, exotic woods like ebony, rosewood, or intricately lacquered oak, often gilded with real gold leaf, adorned with painted panels, or inlaid with mother of pearl. This wasn't just a place to rest your head, it was a visible, undeniable, and often intimidating declaration of immense, almost divine wealth and power. These beds were often so colossal, so heavy, and so intricately constructed that they were literally built in situ, assembled in the chamber and rarely, if ever, moved. They were not just pieces of furniture, they were immovable fixtures, symbols of permanence and dynastic status within a lineage, meant to convey an impression of unshakable authority. The very height of the bed, often requiring 2 or 3 steps or a velvet-covered stool to ascend into, was a deliberate visual cue, physically and socially elevating the sleeper above the common masses, reinforcing their exalted position. It was a throne you could lie down in. Supporting these incredibly important, and presumably very well-fed sleepers, were mattresses that reached the pinnacle of pre-industrial comfort. Gone are any lingering thoughts of mere straw. Now, we're talking multiple layers of the finest feather beds, each stuffed to plump, exquisite perfection, with the most luxurious goose down, sometimes even scented with exotic dried herbs, lavender or rose petals, to mask the inevitable, persistent odours of a not quite hygienic age. Beneath these feather clouds might be a firm base mattress of horsehair, or even another layer of softer, finely cut straw, all designed to create a cushioned, supportive, and supremely insulated sleeping experience. The sheer volume of feathers and the skilled labour required to create and maintain these layers represented a staggering investment, a clear indication of a fortune that could buy entire villages. But the true, breathtaking display of luxury, the absolute zenith of ostentation, lay in the bedding and its accompanying trappings. We're talking not just sheets, but multiple layers of the finest, most exquisitely woven linen or even delicate silk, often bleached to a dazzling, impossible white, smoothed, intricately folded, and perhaps even embroidered with the monarch's crest or initial. These sheets would be changed with astonishing frequency, sometimes daily, a radical departure from peasant life, demanding constant laundering by an army of laundresses and meticulous care from the chamber staff. These were crafted from the most luxurious textiles known to the world: sumptuous silks, heavy velvets, shimmering brocades, and intricate damasks woven with elaborate patterns, sometimes richly embroidered with real gold and silver thread, or even studded with precious pearls, gleaming gemstones, and delicate passementerie. And cords that cost a small fortune. Imagine a bed that literally glittered and shimmered, a walking treasury in repose. These textiles were not just for warmth, they were a lavish, undeniable display of sumptuary excess, designed to impress, intimidate, and constantly remind every single person who glimpsed it of the occupant's exalted, almost divine status. The bed itself might even be placed within an alcove, a recessed area often closed off by heavy curtains, creating a room within a room that added another layer of privacy and theatrical grandeur. And who, you might ask, was responsible for managing this colossal, exquisitely crafted monument to slumber? This is where the bedmaker truly comes into their own, evolving from a simple servant into a highly specialized, incredibly trusted, and profoundly influential courtly official. These were not simply domestic servants who fetched water. They were often men, though women played crucial, if slightly less public, roles in the chamber. More broadly, usually of genteel birth, often minor nobles themselves, who served in the most intimate, privileged spaces of the monarch or powerful noble. Their job wasn't just to change sheets or fluff pillows. It was to manage the entire bedchamber, a pivotal nexus of political power, social interaction, and profound vulnerability. They were responsible for the meticulous care of the bed and its incredibly expensive trappings, ensuring not only cleanliness and comfort, but also, crucially, the security of a space where the most sensitive secrets were often whispered. But their duties extended far beyond mere linen folding. These bedmakers were present during the king's most vulnerable, unvarnished moments, when he woke, when he retired, when he was ill, when he was, well, on the stool. They literally saw the king in his nightshirt, heard his private conversations with advisors, witnessed his true moods unfiltered by courtly decorum, and were privy to his physical frailties. This unparalleled proximity to power made them privy to invaluable information, the juiciest court gossip, and the monarch's true temperament. The groom of the stool, for instance, had the dubious honour of assisting the monarch with his most personal ablutions, a position that, while seemingly demeaning to our modern minds, granted unparalleled private access. This meant direct, unfiltered communication, bypassing all the usual court hierarchies and sycophants, making them incredibly influential in advising the king, delivering messages from other courtiers, and even acting as gatekeepers to his attention. Imagine the sheer, absolute trust required for such a role. An incompetent or disloyal bedmaker could literally poison the king in his sleep, smuggle a message to an enemy, or simply overhear a critical state secret that could change the course of history. Their lives, therefore, were a delicate, high-wire dance of absolute loyalty, quiet observation, and careful discretion, all while meticulously ensuring the royal mattress was just right and that no assassins were hiding in the folds of the velvet. The lever, the elaborate morning waking ceremony, and the coucher, the equally elaborate evening retiring ceremony, were not just routines. They were intricate court rituals, where courtiers, ambassadors, and favoured supplicants would be granted an audience with the monarch or noble in their bedchamber. Imagine a king, propped up in his magnificent bed, often wearing a nightcap and surrounded by yards of velvet, silk, and gold embroidery, conducting state business, receiving petitions, or granting favours, all before he even put on his breeches. This was the ultimate power move, a display of accessibility that simultaneously reinforced his supreme authority. The bedmaker was central to these rituals, ensuring everything was prepared, that the right people were admitted in the correct order of precedence, and that the illusion of royal majesty, even in repose, was perfectly maintained. The bed wasn't just furniture, it was a throne from which power was exercised, even in sleep. And what about hygiene at this truly opulent level? The sheer volume and delicacy of the heavy embroidered fabrics made frequent deep cleaning nearly impossible, without damaging the costly materials. Instead, strong perfumes, rich incense, and sweet-smelling herbal sachets would be liberally used, not just for pleasure, but to mask the inevitable, persistent odours of a not-quite hygienic age and the sheer number of people present. While nobles and royals did bathe, it was still not a daily affair, often viewed as a medicinal, social, or ritualistic activity, rather than a purely hygienic one. But the bed itself, or rather its immediate surrounds, was kept as meticulously clean as possible, with those fine linens being changed frequently. The perennial battle against vermin, while perhaps less pervasive or obvious than in a peasant's hut, was still ongoing. No amount of gold leaf could deter a determined flea. The bedmaker would be responsible for regularly airing out the massive feather beds, beating them often with special tools to dislodge insects, and being ever vigilant against unwelcome visitors. It was a constant, if slightly more perfumed and less obvious, struggle. Finally, this elevated status and intimate access brought with it a terrifying flip side: security, espionage, and political intrigue. The royal bedchamber, for all its opulence, was a profoundly vulnerable place. A monarch, asleep, was at his most exposed, a prime target for enemies. Poison, daggers, or crucial political plots often centred on access to or actions within the bedchamber. An ambitious rival, a foreign spy, a disgruntled courtier, or a genuinely disloyal servant could gain unparalleled access through such a role. Histories are rife with tales of assassination attempts, clandestine meetings, and crucial political decisions made within the seemingly private confines of a royal bed. The bedmaker, therefore, was not just a domestic, they were a silent guard, a trusted confidant, a potential pawn in the deadliest games of courtly power, and sometimes an unwilling witness to secrets that could cost them their lives. Their lives could be forfeit if anything went wrong, or if they were merely suspected of disloyalty, making their existence a constant tightrope walk between privilege and peril. So, for the aristocracy and royalty, the bedmaker was transformed from a simple labourer into a figure of immense trust, surprising power, and often political significance. The bed itself evolved from a place of basic rest into a sprawling symbol of wealth, a stage for elaborate ceremony, and a dangerous nexus of political intrigue. Their lives were intimately intertwined with the most powerful figures of the age, making their unexpected lives a fascinating blend of meticulous domesticity and high-stakes courtly drama. And believe me, the beds were only going to get more ridiculously grand from here, until they finally started to shrink again. Right then, my friends, we've journeyed through the straw-filled hovels and the burgeoning feather beds, finally ascending to the dizzying heights of royal bedchambers, where beds were less furniture and more gilded fortresses of power. Tonight, we're pulling back the heavy velvet curtains and peering behind the scenes, exploring the specialized tools, the intricate techniques, and the sheer, relentless labor that went into creating and maintaining these historical beds. From the humblest pallet to the most ostentatious royal canopy. Because it turns out, there was an entire unseen industry, a subtle symphony of craftsmanship and constant upkeep, dedicated to ensuring a good, or at least appropriately grand, night's rest. So, before you marvel at the complexity of their craft, perhaps hit that like button and subscribe. Only, of course, if you're ready to appreciate the forgotten art of mattress fluffing, vermin hunting, and the surprisingly intricate world of pre-industrial domestic engineering. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights, imagine the rhythmic thwack of a mattress beater, and let's ease into tonight's truly revealing journey together. Imagine for a moment the tools of the trade for a medieval or early modern bedmaker. Forget vacuums, steam cleaners, or even modern irons. Their arsenal was far more rudimentary yet surprisingly effective, honed by centuries of practical necessity. For the most basic peasant bed, the tools were literally your hands, a strong back, and perhaps a simple rake or pitchfork to drag out the old straw. But as beds became more sophisticated, so did the implements. For the rope-sprung frames of the gentry, a dedicated servant would often use a tensioning tool. A simple wooden lever or a sturdy stick to pull those ropes taut. This wasn't a gentle task. It required considerable strength to ensure the mattress didn't sag, providing a firm, if still uncomfortable, sleeping surface. Every night, or at least every few nights, those ropes needed attention, a constant battle against the forces of gravity and wear. The bedmaker was, in a sense, an early engineer, understanding the mechanics of tension and support. The crucial component of any comfortable bed, of course, was the mattress, and its creation was a specialized craft in itself. For the wealthier classes, the construction of a feather bed was an intricate process, often involving dedicated artisans. First, huge quantities of feathers and down, usually from geese or ducks, had to be collected. This was no small feat. Imagine plucking hundreds of birds. A messy, laborious task often done in spring. These feathers weren't just stuffed in a bag. They had to be meticulously cleaned, dried, and aired to prevent rot and mildew, and to discourage pests. They were then carefully packed into large, sturdy sacks, made of dense linen or canvas, hand-stitched to prevent the precious feathers from escaping. Multiple such sacks might be layered on a single bed to achieve the desired plumpness and height. Beneath these, a coarser mattress of horsehair, wool, or finely cut straw might provide a firmer base. The very act of stuffing these mattresses, ensuring an even distribution of material, was a skill, preventing lumps and hollows that would plague the sleeper. The bedmaker, in the chamber, was responsible for the ongoing maintenance of these valuable assets, knowing how to refluff them daily, turn them regularly, and perhaps even patch them when a seam burst, threatening a feather blizzard. But the fight against vermin was a perpetual, never-ending battle, even for the most opulent beds. No amount of gilded carving or silk brocade could deter a determined flea or bedbug. The bedmaker's duties were, in part, those of a pest controller. They would regularly beat the mattresses and bedding with specialized wooden beaters, large, flat paddles designed to dislodge dust, dirt, and, crucially, the various tiny inhabitants. Imagine the cloud of detritus that would rise from a royal feather bed, a testament to the persistent struggle. Bed frames might be regularly wiped down with strong-smelling herbs, or even crude insecticides, though these were often just as dangerous to humans. Curtains, tapestries, and covers were shaken out vigorously, aired in the sunlight, which helped kill some pests, and meticulously examined for any signs of infestation. Sometimes, special aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, or wormwood would be placed within the mattress or among the linens, not just for pleasant scent, but for their perceived pest-repelling qualities. This was a constant vigilance, a daily skirmish against an enemy that, for all its tiny size, could severely impact the comfort, health, and reputation of the noble household. The elaborate bed hangings, canopies, and curtains that adorned noble and royal beds were not just decorative flourishes. They served multiple, crucial functions and demanded specialized care. These were made from incredibly expensive textiles: silk, velvet, brocade, often lined with furs or other luxurious fabrics. The canopy, that magnificent roof over the bed, provided a sense of grandeur, but also a practical purpose. It helped to trap warmth in the drafty, cavernous rooms of medieval castles and palaces. The heavy curtains, drawn completely around the bed at night, created a secluded, warmer room within a room, offering a precious degree of privacy that was otherwise rare in communal living spaces. But these hangings were magnets for dust, grime, and vermin. The bedmaker, or a specialized chamber servant, was responsible for their regular airing, shaking, and careful cleaning. Imagine the delicate work of brushing down heavy velvet or silk, perhaps using soft cloths or special brushes to avoid damaging the costly fabric or its intricate embroidery. These hangings, often interchangeable, would also be stored carefully when not in use, protected from moths and damp. It was a complex logistical challenge to keep these textile masterpieces in pristine condition, a testament to the household's wealth and the bedmaker's skill. Beyond the immediate bedmaker, an entire ecosystem of specialized trades contributed to the creation and maintenance of these elaborate beds. The bed frame itself might be crafted by a master carpenter or even a carver, who would painstakingly decorate it with heraldry, religious scenes, or intricate patterns. For the most opulent beds, gilders would apply real gold leaf, and painters might add decorative motifs. The fabrics were the work of skilled weavers and embroiderers, often from distant lands, creating the silks, velvets, and elaborate brocades. Upholsterers might be called upon to attach padding and the hangings themselves. Joiners and turners crafted the posts and structural elements. Even the humble ropes of earlier beds were the product of rope makers. These beds were, in essence, collaborative works of art, drawing on the expertise of numerous artisans. The bedmaker in the chamber, therefore, was not just a lone servant. They were the final manager of a multi-million-dollar, in today's equivalent, piece of furniture, coordinating its upkeep and presentation, relying on the skills of many unseen hands. The daily ritual of making the noble bed was often a precise, almost ceremonial affair. In the morning, the bedmaker, or chamber staff, would carefully draw back the curtains, air the bedding, beat and fluff the feather mattresses, often a surprisingly violent activity to restore their plumpness, smooth the sheets, and arrange the various blankets and coverlets. For a royal bed, this could involve multiple people, working in concert to present the bed immaculately for the day. In the evening, the process was reversed, with curtains drawn, sheets turned down, and often a warming pan, a long-handled pan filled with hot coals, passed between the sheets to take away the chill before the noble occupant retired. This wasn't just about comfort, it was about maintaining a strict sense of order, propriety, and the visible display of wealth and meticulous domestic management. Beyond the physical labour, the pests, and the sheer expense, there was the constant pressure of perfection and discretion. For a noble bedmaker, a wrinkled sheet, a lumpy mattress, or, heaven forbid, a visible flea, could be a serious professional transgression, reflecting poorly on the entire household, and potentially incurring the wrath of a demanding lord or lady. And given their intimate access, discretion was paramount. They saw and heard everything, from marital disputes to secret meetings, from physical ailments to private anxieties. Their ability to keep secrets, to be utterly invisible and silent witnesses, was as crucial as their skill with a beating stick or a tensioning rope. Their lives were a paradox, working in the most intimate spaces, yet expected to have no personal life or opinions of their own, lest they jeopardize the trust placed in them. So, the unexpected lives of these historical bedmakers were a fascinating blend of practical craftsmanship, relentless domestic duty, and the quiet management of extreme luxury. They were the unseen architects of comfort, the silent warriors against vermin, and the trusted guardians of privacy and secrets. Their tools were simple, their techniques honed by generations, and their daily grind, a testament to the enduring human desire for a good night's sleep, no matter how much effort and how many other people's efforts it required. And believe me, their story is far from over as we move into the complexities of their status and challenges. We've just pulled back the velvet curtains and glimpsed the meticulous, often back-breaking, labour involved in creating and maintaining those colossal, gilded monuments to aristocratic slumber. We've seen the specialised tools, the the endless fluffing of feathers, and the constant battle against medieval vermin. But now we're going to dive even deeper, moving beyond the how and into the who and what it truly meant to be one of these essential yet often unacknowledged figures. Tonight we're exploring the intricate hierarchy, the surprising status, and the very real personal challenges faced by these historical bedmakers, particularly those serving the powerful. So, before you dismiss them as mere domestic staff, perhaps hit that like button and subscribe. Only, of course, if you're ready to unravel the complex social tapestry where a person's worth was measured not just by birth, but by how close they slept to the king, and how many secrets they silently held. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights, imagine the quiet, watchful presence of someone who knows everything, and let's ease into tonight's truly revealing journey together. Prepare yourselves for a world where making a bed was just the beginning of your responsibilities, and sometimes your dangers. Imagine for a moment the vast, sprawling household of a medieval or early modern noble, or even more so, a royal court. This wasn't just a family, it was a miniature, self-contained city, bustling with hundreds, sometimes thousands of servants. And within this complex ecosystem, the bedmaker was not a singular, undifferentiated role. There was a distinct, rigidly enforced hierarchy of bed-related service, reflecting the immense importance placed on the comfort, security, and symbolic power of the lord or monarch's bed. At the bottom rung, you might have the anonymous chambermaids, typically young women, responsible for the general cleanliness of many lesser beds, fetching water, scrubbing floors, and doing the heavy lifting of laundering. Their lives were harsh, poorly paid, and largely invisible. Just another cog in the vast domestic machine, their days filled with constant, back-breaking chores. But as we ascend that gilded ladder, the roles become far more specialised and significant. For the upper gentry and lesser nobility, a dedicated chamber servant, often female, known as a chamberwoman or chambermaid of higher standing, would be responsible for their personal bedchamber. These individuals were usually loyal, long-serving, and often came from the local village or the family's broader estate. Their duties were comprehensive, managing the linens, ensuring the mattresses were properly maintained, keeping the chamber clean and warm, and attending to the more personal needs of their master or mistress. They were privy to the daily rhythms of the household, heard the gossip, and understood the subtle cues of their employer. Their status, while still that of a servant, was elevated by their proximity to the family, often seen as trustworthy and essential. They might even have their own small, private room within the household, a considerable luxury in itself. Their lives, though still defined by service, offered a degree of stability and a precious modicum of respect. However, the true zenith of bed-making power and prestige was reached in the royal court, with positions like the groom of the chamber and the infamous groom of the stool. These were not just servants, they were, as we touched on before, often men of gentle birth, minor nobility, or trusted retainers, chosen for their absolute loyalty, discretion, and keen intelligence. The title, groom, originally meant a male servant of a specific rank, but in these roles, it indicated an unparalleled level of intimacy and trust with the monarch. Their responsibilities went far, far beyond merely making the bed. They were the chief custodians of the royal bedchamber, a sacred, powerful space. They managed the king's personal schedule within that room, ensured its security, a matter of life and death, literally, oversaw the most exquisite and expensive furnishings, and, crucially, were constant, silent witnesses to the monarch's most private moments. They saw the king unadorned, heard his unfiltered thoughts, and were privy to his physical frailties, his moods, and his true character, often before anyone else at court. This kind of access, this unparalleled intimacy, was a currency more valuable than gold. This brings us to the surprising influence and power these individuals could wield. Because they were constantly at the monarch's side, they became indispensable gatekeepers. Want to present a petition to the king, you might need to go through the groom of the chamber. need to deliver an urgent message that can't wait for formal court procedures. The groom is your man. Their quiet counsel could sway a monarch's decision. Their subtle word could make or break a courtier's career. The groom of the stool, in particular, due to his unique and consistent access, could literally influence affairs of state while assisting the king in his most vulnerable moments. Imagine the kind of trust and political savvy required to maintain such a position. They became the king's eyes and ears, his most reliable messengers, and often his most trusted personal advisors, all while ensuring his sheets were perfectly crisp and his chamber was secure. Their lives were a delicate dance between maintaining the humble facade of a servant and subtly exerting immense, almost invisible, power. They were the ultimate whisper network of the court. But with great proximity to power came immense personal challenges and terrifying risks. The life of a royal bedmaker was a constant tightrope walk. Their discretion had to be absolute. A misplaced word, a whispered secret, or an indiscreet observation could mean not just their own ruin, but potentially the downfall of a monarch or the unravelling of a sensitive political alliance. They lived in constant fear of being accused of disloyalty, of eavesdropping, or of having been compromised by rivals. The political intrigues of court were deadly, and anyone with such intimate access was a prime target for bribery, manipulation, or even assassination. Imagine the psychological burden of knowing that your life, and perhaps the fate of the kingdom, could hinge on your ability to keep a straight face while listening to a king's drunken ramblings, or to quietly dispose of a sensitive document. They were expected to be utterly loyal, completely incorruptible, and eternally vigilant, a near impossible standard in a world rife with ambition and betrayal. Their health was also at risk. They were exposed to royal illnesses, and their constant presence meant long hours and little personal time. A royal bedmaker might live a life of privilege compared to a peasant, but it was a gilded cage, demanding a constant, exhausting performance of loyalty and unwavering service. Their personal lives, if they even had much of one, were often deeply intertwined with their service. Marriage, family, and personal ambitions often took a back seat to the demands of the court. A groom might eventually be rewarded with land, titles, or a wealthy marriage arranged by the monarch, but only after decades of unwavering, discreet service. Many spent their entire adult lives in the king's shadow, their personal identities subsumed by their role. They were the ultimate, behind-the-scenes figures, integral to the daily functioning of power, yet rarely stepping into the direct glare of public recognition until historical scholars, centuries later, stumbled upon their fascinating stories in dusty archives. So, the unexpected lives of historical bedmakers, particularly those serving the elite, were a profound paradox. They inhabited a world of extreme luxury and intimate proximity to power, yet were bound by the strictures of service and the constant threat of political peril. Their daily tasks of arranging a bed were elevated to an art form, interwoven with security, diplomacy, and the management of a monarch's most vulnerable moments. They were the silent, watchful guardians of royal slumber, holding in their quiet discretion more secrets than most historians could ever dream of uncovering, making their unexpected lives a truly compelling testament to the hidden engines of history. And believe me, their story continues to evolve even further as we consider what ultimately led to their decline. My friends, we've just explored the dizzying heights of royal bedmaking, where the act of fluffing a feather bed was interwoven with political intrigue and the fate of nations. We've marvelled at the colossal, gilded monuments to power and the meticulous, yet precarious, lives of the grooms who guarded them. But as with all things in history, change is the only constant, and even the most extravagant, politically charged bed was destined to evolve. Tonight we're tracing the fascinating decline of the ceremonial bed, the shift towards personal privacy, and the slow, often grudging, march towards modern hygiene and comfort. Because the bed, like society itself, was about to undergo a profound transformation, rendering the old ways and the old bed makers increasingly obsolete. So, before you bid a final farewell to those velvet-draped, secret-laden royal beds, perhaps hit that like button and subscribe. Only, of course, if you're ready to witness the quiet revolution that shrank the bed and privatized our sleep. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights. Imagine the subtle shift from public spectacle to private sanctuary, and let's ease into tonight's final, transformative journey together. Prepare yourselves for the surprisingly profound impact of a simple desire for a good private night's sleep. Imagine the lavish, semi-public bedchamber of Louis XIV at Versailles, a bustling hub where courtiers watch the king rise and retire. Now, fast forward a century or two. The Age of Enlightenment began to dawn, bringing with it new philosophies about individualism, personal space, and the very nature of privacy. Suddenly, the idea of a monarch conducting state business from his bed, surrounded by a throng of courtiers, began to seem less like a majestic display of power, and more like, well, a bit awkward, frankly. There was a growing, almost imperceptible cultural shift away from the bed as a public stage and towards its function as a private sanctuary. The ceremonial bed, with its immense size and elaborate hangings, began to shrink, both physically and symbolically. While still grand, beds became less about demonstrating wealth to the outside world and more about providing comfort and seclusion to the occupant. The enormous canopies and heavy curtains, once designed to create a room within a room for warmth and spectacle, slowly started to simplify, then diminish, reflecting a new desire for light, air, and an altogether less formal approach to sleep. The lever and coucher ceremonies, once central to court life, gradually faded in importance, eventually becoming mere historical footnotes as monarchs sought more personal, less performative morning and evening routines. It was a quiet revolution, transforming the very meaning of the word bedroom, from a semi-public reception area to a truly private retreat. Concurrent with this shift in bed design and social custom was a revolutionary, if slow and uneven, evolution in concepts of hygiene and public health. For centuries, as we've seen, the battle against dirt, disease and vermin was a losing one, largely fought with perfumes and desperate measures. But as scientific understanding began to trickle through society, first slowly, then with increasing momentum, the notion of actual cleanliness started to take precedence over merely masking foul odours. The discovery of germs, even if not fully understood for centuries, and the growing recognition that filth contributed to disease, began to change domestic practices. Instead of just beating mattresses to dislodge fleas, people started to understand the importance of airing rooms, washing linens with greater frequency and more effective soaps, and even seeking ways to make beds less hospitable to pests. Feather beds, while still luxurious, came under scrutiny for their difficulty to truly clean. Mattress technology began to experiment with materials that were less prone to infestation and easier to air and sterilize. The bedmaker, now, was not just about presentation and security. They were increasingly tasked with maintaining a genuinely healthier sleeping environment, a shift that required new routines and a more rigorous approach to domestic sanitation. It was a long, slow journey from simply tolerating filth to actively combating it. This period also saw significant, though incremental, technological advancements that would fundamentally alter the structure of the bed and the labour of its makers. While the invention of the coiled metal spring wouldn't fully revolutionise mattresses until the 19th century, earlier innovations laid the groundwork. The traditional rope-laced frames, prone to sagging and constant tightening, gradually gave way to more stable wooden slat foundations, and then to various experimental forms of webbing or primitive spring systems. This meant less strenuous, bed-making, labour in terms of adjusting tension. Mattress stuffing became more varied and refined. Horsehair, long a common filling, was joined by cotton, kapok, and eventually rubberized materials. The very act of manufacturing mattresses slowly shifted from bespoke, hand-stitched sacks in individual homes, to a more standardized artisanal craft, and eventually to industrial production. No longer was a bedmaker solely responsible for managing the actual stuffing. They were increasingly dealing with pre-made, more durable mattress components. This mechanization, however nascent, chipped away at the highly specialized hands-on skills that had defined the bedmaker's role for centuries. The bed became a product, not just a creation. As these changes took hold, the highly specialized, incredibly intimate roles of the courtly bedmaker, like the groom of the stool, began their inevitable decline. As monarchs sought greater privacy, the need for a constant retinue in the bedchamber diminished. The elaborate lever and coucher ceremonies, once vital political stages, became less formal, less frequent, and eventually almost entirely ceremonial or even abandoned. The uncomfortably close access that had given these grooms such immense influence was no longer desired or deemed necessary by increasingly private monarchs. The political bedmaker faded, replaced by more traditional domestic staff who still maintained the bed, but without the same degree of intimate trust or influence over state affairs. Their job reverted to a more purely domestic function, stripping away the layers of power and intrigue that had once made it so unique. The era of the all-knowing, all-seeing groom was coming to a quiet, discreet end. This convergence of changing social customs, evolving hygiene standards, and technological advancements ultimately led to the rise of the truly private bedroom. The bed, once a semi-public symbol of status and a communal gathering point, was now firmly relegated to a secluded, personal space. This wasn't just about physical separation. It was a profound cultural shift towards valuing individual privacy, a desire for a sanctuary where one could truly be alone, away from the constant scrutiny of the household. The bed became a place for personal rest, intimacy between a couple, not a whole family, and individual reflection. The duties of the bedmaker, while still important for maintaining cleanliness and comfort, became less about ceremony and more about efficient, discreet service. They were no longer the gatekeepers of royal access, but the quiet maintainers of a personal, domestic sanctuary. The very definition of sleep itself was changing, from a communal act of survival to a private act of rejuvenation. Finally, the long, slow journey of the historical bedmaker culminates in their legacy for our modern world. While their specific roles have largely vanished, replaced by industrial mattress factories and automated washing machines, their story offers profound insights. It reminds us of the incredible human desire for comfort and security, a relentless drive that propelled innovations from straw piles to memory foam. It highlights the often unseen labour that underpins our modern conveniences, forcing us to consider the immense effort once required for tasks we now take for granted. More deeply, it reflects the evolution of our values, from the communal survival of the peasant to the status display of the noble, to our modern emphasis on individual privacy and personal well-being. The bed, in its journey from public stage to private sanctuary, mirrors the broader cultural shift towards individualism and the growing importance of personal space, and a quiet, uninterrupted night's sleep. So, next time you sink into your perfectly made bed, remember the anonymous hands, the forgotten grooms, and the centuries of relentless effort that went into creating that ultimate and once utterly unexpected comfort. And that, my friends, is a bedtime story worth telling. We've just traced the fascinating decline of the grand ceremonial bed, watching it shrink from a public stage to a private sanctuary, a revolution driven by new ideas of privacy and hygiene. We've said a quiet farewell to the grooms of the stool, whose intimate access to power dwindled with the rise of personal space. But before we fully embrace the modern mattress, let's pull back and look at another, crucial, often overlooked aspect of these unexpected lives: the global trade, the surprising sources, and the environmental impact of the very materials that made up historical beds. Because from the humblest straw to the most luxurious silks and feathers, every component had a story, a cost, and a network of unseen hands that brought it to the bedchamber. This wasn't just about what was in the bed, it was about the world that supplied it. So, before you casually toss a synthetic pillow onto your bed tonight, consider giving a like and subscribing, only of course, if you're ready to unravel the surprising international supply chains that literally supported a good night's sleep. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there. Now, dim the lights. Imagine the rustle of reeds and the distant cry of geese. And let's ease into tonight's truly widespread and often environmentally impactful journey together. Prepare yourselves for the surprisingly global story of medieval bedding. Imagine for a moment the bedrock of all peasant beds: straw, rushes, and dried leaves. This wasn't just a convenient choice, it was an absolute necessity, the cheapest, most abundant, and most local material available. For the anonymous peasant, the bedmaker's first task was simply to gather these natural resources. This meant a constant seasonal chore of going out into the fields after the harvest, when straw was plentiful from the threshed grain, or venturing into the local wetlands to cut rushes, or scouring the forest floor for fallen dry leaves. This was physically demanding work, exposed to the elements, and carried out with simple tools like sickles or bare hands. The environmental impact was generally localized. A careful peasant would manage their resources, but excessive cutting of rushes could impact local ecosystems, and clearing too many leaves could strip natural ground cover. Yet, for the most part, these materials were renewable and sustainably gathered out of sheer need. The bedmaker, in this context, was also a direct participant in the immediate local ecosystem, understanding the cycles of growth and decay. A silent, unacknowledged environmental manager of their own small plot of comfort. This was the most direct connection to the land, woven into the very fabric of their sleep. As we move up to the gentry and merchant classes, the materials for mattresses became more refined, more expensive, and often drew on a wider, more complex network of supply. The most significant upgrade, as we've discussed, was the feather bed. But where did all those feathers come from? Primarily from geese and ducks, often raised specifically for their meat, eggs, and feathers. This meant a localized but still significant agricultural endeavor. Peasant families, or tenant farmers on noble estates, would raise these birds, and their feathers, meticulously cleaned and dried, would become a valuable commodity. Imagine the laborious process: plucking the birds, often done while they were alive, a rather cruel but common practice, carefully separating the down from coarser feathers, and then airing and beating them to ensure they were clean and pest-free. This created a new, specialized mini-industry within the agricultural landscape, where the byproduct of poultry farming became a luxury item. The environmental impact here was tied to large-scale waterfowl farming, which, while not industrial, could still impact local water sources and feed demands. The bedmaker in these households wasn't plucking the birds themselves, but they were the end users of this laborious process, understanding the value and care required for these precious fillings. But the medieval bed wasn't just about what was inside the mattress, it was also about what was outside: the bedding, the linens, and especially the elaborate hangings. Fine linen, prized for its smoothness and ability to be bleached white, was often grown locally, but the highest quality, the most delicate weaves, might be imported from regions renowned for their flax production, such as Flanders or parts of France. Wool, while ubiquitous, also had its hierarchies. The finest, softest wool for blankets might come from specific breeds of sheep in England or Spain, creating a complex trade route for textiles. These materials represented a significant investment, requiring skilled weavers and often long-distance transport. The bedmakers' meticulous care for these linens and blankets was a direct reflection of their cost and value, turning laundering and mending into acts of preservation for expensive assets. However, it was the elaborate bed hangings and coverlets of the aristocracy and royalty that truly showcased a global network of luxury materials. Imagine the opulent silks, velvets, and brocades. These exquisite fabrics were not local produce. Silk primarily came from the Far East, China, or through intermediaries in Italy and the Byzantine Empire, travelling vast distances along the Silk Road and maritime trade routes. Velvet and brocade, often woven with complex patterns and metallic threads, were frequently imported from Italy. Florence, Venice, Genoa were famous centres or parts of the Ottoman Empire. These materials were astonishingly expensive, often costing more than entire villages. Their production involved specialised artisans in distant lands, complex dyeing processes using rare pigments like cochineal from the New World or madder from the Levant, and a vast, intricate trade network of merchants, shippers and middlemen. The environmental footprint of these luxury items, while not always directly visible, involved the harvesting of rare dyes, the labour of countless silk producers, and the energy expended in their transport across continents. The bedmaker, in a royal court, in carefully arranging these opulent hangings, was literally engaging with the furthest reaches of the known world, a silent, unacknowledged participant in a vast global economy of luxury. This reliance on distant, exotic materials also brought with it the inherent risks and costs of international trade. Pirates, shipwrecks, overland bandits, political instability, and changing trade routes could all interrupt the supply of these precious textiles. This made them even more exclusive and expensive, reserved only for the very highest echelons of society. A lord's bed hangings were not just luxurious, they were a testament to his ability to command resources from across the globe, a visible display of geopolitical influence. The bedmaker was entrusted with these immensely valuable assets, their care directly impacting the family's financial standing and outward display of power. Losing a set of silk hangings to fire, damp, or vermin was not just an inconvenience, it was a devastating financial blow, equivalent to losing a small fortune. Even the humble bed frame itself became a part of this resource network. While simpler frames might be made from local oak, the truly grand beds of royalty often incorporated exotic woods or specialised craftsmanship. Ebony, for instance, was imported from distant tropical regions, its dark, dense beauty a mark of extreme luxury. Lacquered woods, painted panels, or intricate inlays often drew on techniques and materials from across Europe and sometimes further afield. This meant that even the structural elements of the bed were part of a complex, often international supply chain, requiring skilled carpenters, carvers, and finishers who might themselves have travelled to learn these specialised crafts. The bedmaker, in overseeing the assembly and maintenance of these elaborate structures, was also supervising the care of a multifaceted global artefact. So, the unexpected lives of historical bedmakers were inextricably linked to a sprawling, often global, network of material acquisition and trade. From the peasant gathering local straw to the court official arranging imported silks, their duties connected them to the land, to distant farmers, to skilled artisans, and to vast international markets. Their efforts, however humble or grand, were a testament to the continuous human demand for comfort, or at least the illusion of it, and the lengths to which societies would go to procure the very stuff of sleep. The bed, it turns out, was far more than just a place to rest. It was a microcosm of medieval resource management, trade, and even environmental impact. And this global perspective only deepens our understanding of their truly unexpected lives. We've just charted the grand shrinking of the royal bed, watching it recede from a public spectacle into a private sanctuary, a revolution driven by newfangled notions of personal space, and a burgeoning, if still rudimentary, understanding of hygiene. But before we fully embrace the sanitised, spring-loaded comfort of the modern mattress, let's peel back another crucial, often overlooked, and frankly, rather grim aspect of these unexpected lives. The hidden war against disease, the shocking public health risks inherent in every bed, and the unwitting role bed makers played on the front lines of medieval epidemics. So, before you casually toss a fluffy, hypoallergenic pillow onto your bed tonight, consider giving a like and subscribing. Only, of course, if you're prepared to unravel the truly unsettling truth about how your medieval ancestors slept or didn't sleep, and how a simple piece of bedding could be a vector of death. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fascinating to see who's out there, safe and sound, in their sterile sleep havens. Now, dim the lights, imagine the distant, unsettling whisper of a cough in the night. and let's ease into tonight's truly widespread and often fatal journey together. Prepare yourselves for the grim reality that your bed was often a death trap. Imagine for a moment the medieval bed in all its forms, from the peasant's straw pile to the noble's feather-stuffed, velvet-draped edifice. Far from being a haven of peace and recuperation, these beds were, in a chilling reality, often potent vectors and breeding grounds for disease. This wasn't because people wanted them to be, but because the knowledge and technology to make them truly safe simply didn't exist. The primary culprits in this silent war were, of course, the ubiquitous vermin, fleas, lice and bedbugs. These weren't just itchy annoyances, the kind that make you scratch your head during a long meeting. Oh no. These tiny, blood-sucking passengers were the silent, often deadly, couriers of medieval pestilence. Fleas carried the dreaded Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the bubonic plague, which periodically wiped out vast swathes of the population. Lice could transmit typhus and relapsing fever. Bedbugs, while not definitively linked to major epidemics, added to the general misery and created open wounds ripe for secondary infections in a world without antibiotics. Imagine the nightly assault, the constant crawling and biting, a pervasive, low-level torture that fundamentally undermined any chance of restorative sleep, all while unknowingly injecting you with deadly pathogens. Medieval bedding, particularly for the lower classes, was rarely, if ever, truly clean. Straw mattresses accumulated not only dirt and dust, but also human skin cells, sweat, occasional bodily fluids, food crumbs, and sometimes even animal droppings. This organic soup created a perfect, warm, damp environment for bacteria, mold, and mildew to flourish, releasing allergens and pathogens into the air. Even the more luxurious feather beds, while offering greater comfort, were difficult to clean thoroughly. They could harbour dust mites, mould spores, and, of course, those persistent fleas and bedbugs deep within their downy depths. The sheer weight and volume of heavy embroidered fabrics on noble beds made frequent deep cleaning a near impossibility. Instead, they were aired, beaten and perfumed, an attempt to mask the problem rather than eradicate it. And then there was the compounding horror of shared beds. For peasants, it was a practical necessity, multiple family members huddling together for warmth. For nobles, it was sometimes a matter of ceremony or simply a large bed for a married couple. But if one person in that bed, or even just in the crowded room, contracted an illness, the bed became an incredibly efficient transmission hub. A cough, a sneeze, a fevered sweat, a scratch. All could transfer pathogens or parasites directly from one person to another, multiplying the risk of infection exponentially within a household and subsequently within the entire village. It meant that a seemingly minor illness could quickly become a family-wide catastrophe, with the bed acting as the epicenter of infection. The infrequent and ineffective cleaning methods only exacerbated these issues. Washing linens, even for the wealthy, was a laborious process involving strong lye, harsh soaps if available, and immense physical effort. Heavy fabrics took ages to dry and could easily become mouldy or remain damp, creating more problems. Peasant bedding, as we've noted, was typically only refreshed every few weeks or months, a grim ritual that barely kept ahead of the constant creep of filth and infestation. The medieval bed, therefore, was not just a place to sleep, it was a living, breathing health hazard, an unacknowledged crucible of disease. In this terrifying landscape, the bedmaker, whether a weary peasant or a meticulous groom, often found themselves on the unwitting front lines of public health, without any scientific understanding of what they were truly fighting. Their daily chores, seemingly mundane, were actually primitive, desperate acts of epidemiology. Fighting vermin, the relentless beating of mattresses and bedding with wooden beaters was not just for fluffing, it was a crucial, if often ineffective, form of pest control. Every vigorous thwack was an attempt to dislodge the invisible enemy, to literally beat the plague vectors and disease carriers out of the bed. Imagine the physical effort. the clouds of dust and detritus that would rise, a potent visual and olfactory reminder of the constant losing battle against these tiny, insidious invaders. Bed frames might be routinely wiped down with strong-smelling herbs, or even crude, dangerous insecticides concocted from local plants. Herbal remedies and masking. The widespread use of aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, wormwood, or sweet rushes, placed within the mattress, among the linens, or even scattered on the floor, was not just for pleasant scent, though that was certainly a bonus. These herbs were believed to repel pests, cleanse the air of miasma, bad air, believed to cause disease, and perhaps even have mild antiseptic properties. While often ineffective against virulent pathogens, it was a testament to the desperate attempts to create a healthier environment. Airing and sunning. There was an empirical understanding that fresh air and sunlight helped. Bedding, particularly for the wealthy, would be regularly aired out in the sun, especially on fine days. This practice, while lacking the scientific understanding of UV light's antibacterial properties, did serve to dry out dampness, reducing mold, kill some surface bacteria, and deter some types of parasites. It was a vital, time-consuming routine in maintaining the bed's relative cleanliness. Changing linens for the elite. For aristocratic and royal beds, the frequent changing of fine linens, sometimes daily, was a radical step towards reducing bacterial load and providing a cleaner sleeping surface. While the heavy, decorative outer layers were less often cleaned, the layer closest to the body was changed, offering a crucial, if incomplete, barrier against accumulated filth. This painstaking work, demanding armies of laundresses, was an early, unacknowledged form of preventative health. The impact of these conditions on health and mortality was profound and devastating. High infant mortality, babies, particularly vulnerable due to undeveloped immune systems, were often most at risk. Sleeping nestled with parents and siblings in infested, unsanitized beds meant constant exposure to disease, contributing directly to the shockingly high infant mortality rates of the era. A baby's crib was often not a separate, safer space, but simply a corner of the main bed. Spread of epidemics. The bed became a primary locus for the rapid transmission of epidemics. During outbreaks of plague, smallpox, measles, or influenza, the close confines of the bed, the shared body heat, and the constant presence of vectors meant that entire families could be wiped out in quick succession. The very place where the sick were meant to recover became the engine of the disease's spread. Chronic illness, beyond acute, fatal diseases, the constant exposure to allergens, dust, mold, animal dander, parasites and bacteria lurking in bedding contributed to a myriad of chronic health issues. Persistent respiratory problems, exacerbated by smoky huts, chronic skin conditions from constant itching and unwashed bodies, and a general state of ill health were common, further weakening already vulnerable populations. Body odour and comfort. The constant fight against pervasive body odour, achieved through perfumes and herbs, was also, at its root, a fight against bacterial growth. The discomfort of an itchy, lumpy, damp and smelly bed significantly reduced the quality of sleep, impacting overall well-being and making recovery from illness even harder. The psychological toll of living with such inherent dangers, especially in the most intimate space of your life, was immense. There was the constant nagging anxiety of disease, knowing that even in sleep you weren't truly safe. The powerlessness to truly cleanse or sanitize your environment, despite your best efforts, fostered a deep sense of vulnerability. And for centuries, this profound lack of understanding led to superstition, with illnesses in the bed often linked to curses, evil spirits, or divine punishment, rather than tangible biological causes. It added another layer of existential dread to an already impossible life. So, the unexpected lives of historical bedmakers reveal a harrowing truth, that for much of history, the very act of going to bed was a dangerous undertaking, and the bedmaker was, unknowingly, on the front lines of a constant, invisible war against disease. The eventual shift towards modern hygiene and scientific understanding didn't just transform the bed from a health hazard into a true haven of rest. It also quietly but profoundly changed the very nature of human health, and the daily lives of those who once battled the unseen forces lurking in the folds of every blanket. And that, my friends, is a reality that makes us truly appreciate our clean sheets and, dare I say it, our germ theory.